Welcome to All Nature Connected, a podcast created by the Forest Bathing Institute, where we explore all nature-connected topics, including nature and health, nature-inspired lifestyle, nature connection and forest bathing, nature preservation, and eco-awareness. We hope that this podcast will inspire you to become more connected with nature and your own health and well-being.
Hello everyone, this is Olga from the Forest Bathing Institute, and today we have a special guest on our podcast, Gary Evans. Gary Evans is a co-founder of the Forest Bathing Institute, and today we will learn a little bit more about his journey to opening up the Forest Bathing Institute. So hello, Gary.
Hello everybody.
So really nice to have you on the podcast. As many of you might know, Gary is now one of the world leading experts in nature connection and forest bathing, doing regular interviews with the media and consulting universities and governments as well. So Gary, can you tell us a little bit more about how the Forest Bathing Institute started? What was your inspiration? What were you doing before that?
Well, back to the beginning would be trying to work in the corporate world and never really finding a way to fit in, which led to me feeling quite depressed because I just didn't know what to do with my life. I do remember that I wanted to help people. That was always there, and it was one of my strengths when I worked in companies. I used to get commended by my clients. So I got depressed and really was a bit lost with what to do with myself. And a friend helped me. He basically helped me understand that even though I was in my 30s, it didn't mean that I couldn't find a new path forwards in life. So I started to think a bit more creatively about how to get myself out of the hole I felt like I was in. And I would say intuitively, I was led to yoga. I did a survey of the yoga teachers in the area. And luckily, the first teacher I found was incredible, life-changingly incredible. So I immediately fell in love with yin yoga. And basically, the Gary that walked into the second class, they were like an hour and a half classes. So the second class I went in as Gary, who was feeling depressed and lost. And the Gary that left was no longer lost, basically. Kind of found myself. And it was transformative within 2 sessions of yin yoga, because it is a meditative form of yoga. And so she was very good at getting me into the parasympathetic nervous system. I used to go really deep in her classes, and so life changed for the better after 2 classes of yoga. So that's one thing I'll say to anybody. So it kind of reorientated me. I mean, she was very good on the philosophy. I mean, I'd had no education on managing emotions and this kind of thing prior to finding yoga. Just didn't know what to do with myself. So she kind of was giving me a framework of, oh, yeah, you have these emotions and you can release them. And so I found a way forward. So that led to traveling around the planet, hundreds of thousands of miles in search of the answer to life's questions. So the existential questions like, who are we? Where have we come from? What's the purpose of life? And what's my role in the grand scheme of things? And prior to finding yoga, I would say I was already a good student of history. So I had a long-standing interest in ancient cultures and ancient wisdom going all the way back to sort of 17. So I was already well-read, I would say, compared to the average person. And so when I was traveling around the world, spent about 6 months in Egypt as a tour guide or tour co-host. So up and down the Nile, but it was 6 months predominantly spent inside temples and pyramids with groups meditating. And I was doing similar things, leading groups to Avebury in England, Stonehenge, organising tours to Machu Picchu, did a big tour of Peru and Bolivia. So going to some of these really obscure ancient sites that seem to have a lot of question marks about the builders and the ancient philosophies attached to them. And then spending time in Guatemala, Mexico. And at the same time, I was helping organise conferences in California dedicated, you could say, to ancient wisdom, ancient cultures. So I was spending time with a lot of the people that you see on the History and Discovery channels discussing ancient mysteries. So I had a very good, you could say, peer support group, really sort of penetrating into, you could say, some quite obscure information and some just different ways of looking at the world. But anyone that's been to Egypt, so we regularly used to sit in the shadow of the pyramids because it's hot in the desert. But anyone that's sat at the base of one of these, absolutely incredible. I mean, they're all inspiring, and the mind is just trying to work out how did these people 4,500 years ago create that. So we were out there with geologists and engineers, historians, so all kinds. So we were looking at these things from lots of different informed angles, artists, and discussing various things. But what I was doing at that point was taking people into, you could say, the landscape for meditation purposes. That was what was closest to my heart. I love to take people into ancient sites for self-realization, because that's how I'd found them helping me. So suddenly getting these kind of epiphanies about myself, how I could perhaps make a contribution to the world, or maybe issues that personal challenges to overcome. And so I've been sharing those types of experiences with groups, and it was really life-changing. There's some incredible experiences, many experiences that no one else would believe unless you were there. But of course, they were shared experiences that meant a lot to us. And then towards the end of my travels around the world, we met. So I always say to people, so we got married in Moscow and we went to Paris for the romantic part of the honeymoon. And then somehow you let me talk you into going to Languedoc in the south of France, the Rennes-le-Château area, which is heavily featured in the Dan Brown novels. And when you see the history there is incredible. I mean, the majority of notable names, cultures from history were there or spent time there or invaded and took it over. So obviously it was in the control of the Romans for a long time, but the Cathars and Knights Templar, and but it also has a connection to prehistory. So going all the way back, the cave paintings, they've now started dating in that area, go sort of back to 40,000 before BC. So just an amazing history, including, the Neanderthals were there. And it was while we were there, we went to Nebius Labyrinth, we'll never forget Nebius Labyrinth. So we walked up to the top of this large hill, and it's a limestone plateau. So with limestone, you get the hard and the soft. So the soft limestone has eroded and created this labyrinth. And then this ancient oak forest grew over the top of it. So it felt like something out of Lord of the Rings when we were there. And right in the heart of it, it was almost like a rectangular shape. And I guess people had cut in steps because it was a lower level of the floor. So you went down these steps and then you're in this rectangular shape with an ancient oak forest that's grown over the top of it. But it felt like a temple. Natural temple space is my best description. So we meditated there. And I can't remember if it was at the time or afterwards, but it was during this time in France that basically the Forest Bathing Institute, the seeds were born. We decided that we were going to bring forest bathing to the UK because we both had the love for the scientific foundation, because it was just obvious to us that if you've got that physiological scientific foundation, then if you replicate that in the UK, you've got something incredible to give the NHS. You've also got something incredible to give the entire population, because it's solid science, it's reproducible, and you can start to understand how to use nature for mental health and well-being. But as they've shown in Japan, potentially on the physical level, so yeah, physical, mental, emotional levels. And so far the research is going well. But the realization that came from Nebius Labyrinth was that instead of taking people to Egypt, which is obviously not inaccessible for the majority of people and incredibly expensive, and there were political situations occurring, that if forests could be viewed as, you could say, natural temple space, or a place for people to connect to that sort of deep part of themselves. So if that is possible, which I would say it is in the majority of cases, if you get a little quiet corner somewhere, is probably the main caveat, then you've got a much more accessible way for people to be able to meditate somewhere and perhaps have a sort of realization or just deep sense of inner peace. It's kind of like the bits get fragmented when we're running around, and by coming to a stop and coming in perhaps into mindfulness or meditation, it's like all the pieces kind of come back into a whole. That's how I felt like my yoga practice has helped me. And so that was really the foundations. And then of course we threw our lives behind it ever since.
Yeah, no, it's now you're talking about it, and it feels like this magical journey in a way, feeling very privileged and humbled that we are here and we are able to help people, because similar to you, I first started to look inside myself and see what I can do for my personal growth, but also to help myself, because I was not in a very good place. And I was exploring meditation. I was going to India to study Ayurveda as well, and yoga. And also that's when I met you, and I was still studying philosophy at King's College, I remember. And it was very interesting that while I was studying some Indian schools, but also Greek schools, ancient Greek schools, and others, and more recent philosophical ideas, you were studying, and I believe about 7 translations of the 8 limbs of yoga.
Yeah, the Yoga Sutras.
The Yoga Sutras, yes. And at the same time, looking deeper into nature. And it just really inspiring for me to hear again and to realize how our journeys began as a journey within to maybe help ourselves more. You said you were suffering with stress and depression, similar to me, and we were trying to find ways to help ourselves, and somehow we both together ended up with nature, and we went through similar exploration of different histories and different philosophies. But for us, it felt like nature is the most accessible, and you don't have to, as you said, go to Egypt or spend too much money flying or going anywhere. Nature, well, some of us are not as lucky, but usually we can get some access to nature, and you can still reap so many benefits out of it. And of course, then we're talking about the science, which there probably is another interview coming up we should do about the science, because it's a whole different story. but also talking about how we want to make it accessible to all types of people, of course, working with vulnerable people, working with the governments, the NHS, research, and doing as much as we can to make it as accessible to all groups of people. And it doesn't have to be a certain type of people, predispositions or mindsets. You don't have to be, you can be of any religion or no religion at all, any background, and you can still benefit from it. So I think that's very beautiful. And for me, I think the listeners would really would be interested to know, what are your inspirations for nature? So I know that we have talked a lot about it, and I know that you have looked into lots of issues when you were traveling that you would want to change one day. So I know lots of people get inspired when you talk, and I'm one of those people. And I know that when you say something, I actually know that it's 99% coming true. I don't think you've said anything that you wanted to accomplish that you haven't accomplished yet. So for me, it's a great inspiration. So I think many of us would like to hear about, what are your plans? What would you like to achieve in relation to nature?
Well, where was the inspiration for nature? Well, I'll tell you actually, because there was a parallel story running during the launch. But what really made me focus on nature was ancient Indian and ancient Egyptian philosophy. Because from studying the ancient Indian texts, effectively, I got the message to understand your own nature, look into nature. I think I found it in Egypt first. Because, so I found that message in Egypt first. I then found it in ancient Indian philosophy second. And I revere both cultures. So I thought, right, if two cultures that I have this real reverence for have both told me to understand yourself, look into nature, that is enough. One in isolation, I was like, but both of them giving me the same message, and it was like crystal clear message. And it was correct. It was correct. That has been the life-changing, following that advice. It's really, the best advice, because it does feel like an insatiable curiosity to know myself better. And by knowing myself better, perhaps understanding others better. I find both of those equally compelling. And certainly there have been benefits to getting to know myself better that I've been able to share with others, which makes my heart happy. So it's a win-win. And so, looking into nature and just enjoying, because it's a very enjoyable process, also thrive on being in nature. If there was something new that's caught my curiosity, or when I go out with our son and just playing like I did as a kid. I mean, it's just all very enjoyable in a mindful way when you can be present with it. And then, of course, taking groups of people and seeing them enjoying what I love, that's also thrilling. So there's no doubt in my mind that I'm doing my life's purpose, and that in itself is very beautiful. Because there was a lot of regrets previously, and just the complexity of the subject matter when we bring in the scientific research, it's like I'm not going to be getting bored of this anytime soon. There's plenty to stay fascinated about, and of course now that we conduct research, we're literally helping create this whole thing. So there's a long list of research, but thankfully there's a long list of universities interested in research, so there's a lot more to come.
Thank you, Carrie. That's actually very inspiring, and I think that we started work with universities and still continuing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is it about 50 universities we're working with currently all over the world?
How I classify it is we were in touch with around 70.
70, okay.
And because it really depends on how you would want to define working with. You could say we're assisting or in discussions with. So I tend to define it more as actively discussing study proposals together, which sort of brings it down, I'd say, more accurately to around 6 or 10, because we're turning them away. Because predominantly me doing the organisation of it and the study design. So of course, there's only so much you can do at once. So at this point, we're only accepting proposals to work on physiological research. So we're constantly approached about doing psychometric testing. But as we've got enough physiological studies in the pipeline, I don't want to split the focus across too much at once because it dilute it too much.
Hopefully there'll be more coming at some point, so we can do everything.
Yeah, well, with all of the other universities that we're talking to, there's basically the constant stream of discussion, putting a research proposal together, finding the funder, and then of course doing the study design, the rollout, the measurement, the paper. So it takes about 3 years generally for each one.
Oh wow. I think many people don't realize actually how much work it is, and of course being involved in it, we can say, but maybe that's one thing we can talk about in the future, because I know lots of people get inspired by the scientific work that we do at the Institute. It would be nice to hear a bit more about it at some other point. But I just wanted to maybe touch upon that last question I asked about your hopes for nature. So I know you talked a lot about science and how we're working on showing the benefits of nature. As an outcome for ecology, nature preservation, nature protection, what would be your kind of hopes for the future?
Yeah, so of course our work is about helping people and helping the environment. When you're in the ancient woodland or in areas of nature and you're fully present, absorbing the majesty of the beauty, I've understood that a lot of people haven't had that opportunity, because when you really soak it in how incredible it is, or if you're in ancient woodland, how little is left, you understand that something has to be done, urgent. So that is certainly integral to the work. But the plan that we're working towards, with Professor Lee's help, is of course to evidence the health benefits of nature, so that when we're talking to county councils and government departments, at the moment there isn't any value placed on a forest for the health of the local population. So if you know how much that woodland or forest is saving in the NHS, suddenly you've got a rough idea. It's like, okay, so that forest is worth X amount a year, because otherwise we're going to have these costs for the NHS. So we've got the health economists on standby, probably the best ones, or with the most expertise in the country that we've got lined up. So we're just getting to the point of getting the funding, because we've got to be able to get to a point where we're running studies for a few thousand people. That will then generate some serious data of relevance to the NHS. So let's say in 5 to 10 years, we've done enough physiological studies, we've rolled out with enough social prescribing and working with enough GPs. So we've got a lot of people getting these benefits. We've got a large pool of data. And so we've got to a point where the NHS looks at the data and they say, so the mental health benefits of spending time in parks and forests is worth 500 million to $1 billion a year. I think that's probably a conservative number, because when people that are coming to us have been on antidepressant medication sometimes for 10, 20 years. So the cost of even one person or of stress will go after organs and damaged organs, which means you need to have a transplant. So immediately you're getting into cost of 40, 50,000 upwards for one person. So it doesn't take that much to get to savings of 500 million to $1 billion a year. So if you, of course, if you look at that, it's like, okay, so what are the savings of the NHS for 5 to 10 years? So you get into some big numbers now. So that means that if we invest in this area, by getting, of course, people running the sessions, educating the public, which is important to be self-reliant for preventative healthcare. Now we've got savings in the numbers of billions over even the course of 5 to 10 years. So if you save that, once you start saving that money, you say, so now I've got some extra money. Well, that money can go to the landowners, can't it? It can go to Forestry England, it can go to the National Trust. All the landowners that look after these properties that people are using for their health and well-being do need extra money. It's not easy being a landowner, we're talking to hundreds of them. And of course, we want expansion of what's there. So the ancient woodland is basically, from my view, an acorn of biodiversity. That's where the biodiversity is. So if we create space around ancient woodland, it will spread outwards. Then that acorn can turn into a forest of biodiversity. So where possible, I want that to happen. And that can be supported with savings that have been made to the NHS. So the money's in the system, it just goes from NHS to landowners, and the environment will benefit and all the people. So there's a win-win, and government will be saving a good amount of money. So that's the future we're working towards, and there's no reason we can't get there. We've already got all of the support required to get there, and now it's just time.
Yeah, no, that's very inspiring. And I know that DEFRA, for example, creates scale to quantify the value of a land in terms of mainly focusing on plants, but also other types of biodiversity. But if we add on top of it the value, the therapeutic value of that specific location in terms of how it can help people on physiological or psychological or any other level, it actually adds to the value of the land. So I think that's a very strong argument for nature preservation, on top of it, potential savings. And as you said, these places, if we let them grow a bit bigger, like ancient woodland, creating corridors, that's one of the things, that's the main thing for biodiversity. And then hopefully over time it can help change how we see things now in terms of ecology, biodiversity in this country, maybe even other countries. So Gary, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I'm sure there'll be lots of other topics that can follow out of this interview, but for today I just wanted to maybe go back to how we started about your journey to nature connection, starting with this inquiry within, or also as a journey to help yourself. So for someone who is now listening to you, who probably has a job or not, doesn't really matter, but they live a certain way of life and suddenly they probably feel that they might benefit of a bit of help, and they are interested in nature and they resonate with what you said. So what would be your advice for someone who is in that place where you were when you started your self-inquiry journey, in terms of the things that help you, or maybe nature connection, anything that you use on a daily basis or in general?
Well, from talking to thousands and thousands of people, I've become a firm believer that most of us know what to do for ourselves somewhere deep down. So whether intuitively or following your heart to where you feel called. So certainly if you start looking at these areas, whether it's Tai Chi, Pilates, yoga, having a trip to the sea, going into nature, I mean, where do you basically feel inclined to go to help yourself? So follow that instinct. And it's about, the best thing anyone could do is find the baby step. We don't need where we're going to get to. We just need to know first step. So my first step was looking around for classes in the local area that I found interesting, and then not making a big commitment to myself. So just going to go to this yoga class once and see how I like it. Just going to go to this meditation class once and see how I like it, and just do a little survey. and find the one that you thrive on.
Or maybe join a forest bathing session.
That is always, of course, an option.
And we also have a few of the exercises on our social media. So if you are in nature, you can always open our social media or just watch beforehand. But there are a few tips on how you can start doing nature connection exercises where you are. But thank you very much, Gary. That was very inspirational and very touching and humbling for me to remember that journey that I was privileged to have with you. And we're hoping to hear more from you, but I'll put Gary's details, social media, LinkedIn and others below in case you would like to get in touch. So thank you very much. Until next time.
Bye.